There are men who know exactly how much land they own, how many head of cattle they're running, how many board feet of lumber it would take to replace the barn roof. They keep those numbers in their heads the way other men keep prayers. Precise, reliable, comforting in their certainty. Eli Calloway was that kind of man. He was 61 years old, and he had spent 40 of those years turning a rough parcel of Wyoming earth into something worth being proud of. 400 acres outside of a little town called Dunmore. A ranch that ran itself almost, if a man put the right work into it at the right times. Good cattle. A creek that hadn't run dry in 20 years. A barn that was, he would tell you without boasting, the finest structure in the county. He knew all of this. He kept careful accounts of all of this. What he had stopped keeping account of was himself. Not in any dramatic way. Not in the way that makes a man a cautionary tale or a burden to his neighbors. He ate well enough. He kept his clothes mended. He went to the barber every 3 weeks, paid his debts on time, and could still put in a full day's work that would embarrass men half his age. The people of Dunmore County considered Eli Calloway to be a steady, honorable, quietly formidable man. What they could not see from the outside was what he had quietly decided. Somewhere in the long stretch of years following his wife Ruth's death, Eli had made a calculation. Not a conscious one, not the kind you sit down and work out on paper, but a calculation nonetheless. He had added up the years behind him and subtracted the years he figured he had left, and arrived at a number that told him enough. Not enough in the good sense. Enough in the sense of a door that has been gently and firmly closed. Ruth had been gone 9 years. She had not gone suddenly. She had gone the way winter goes, gradually, irreversibly, taking the warmth with it, degree by degree, until one morning you wake up and the cold has settled all the way through. He had grieved her. He had worked his way through that grief the only way he knew, with his hands and his land and the particular mercy of exhaustion, and then he had arrived at a place that felt, if not like peace, then like the reasonable imitation of it. He was 61 years old. He had his ranch and his horses and a dog named Captain, a big gray hound who asked nothing more of him than to be near him and to be occasionally fed pieces of biscuit under the table. He had Dunmore and his Thursday mornings at the hardware store and his Sunday mornings at the church and the mountains visible from every window of his house. He had decided, without quite deciding, that this was the shape of the rest of his life. He rode into Dunmore on a Wednesday morning in early October for fence wire and oats and a tin of tobacco and nothing else. He came home having forgotten the tobacco entirely. Her name was Anna Voss. She had arrived in Dunmore 6 weeks before Eli first spoke to her, coming west from a town in Ohio to take over the small library that the county had established 4 years prior and very nearly let perish for lack of anyone willing to run it. She was 31 years old. She had pale red hair that she kept pinned up with the focused efficiency of a woman who does not have patience for things that don't stay where you put them. She had a way of looking at a person that made them feel, simultaneously, that they were being taken seriously, and that they had better mean what they said. She had reorganized the library in her first 2 weeks in a way that made everyone who used it realize, for the first time, how badly it had needed reorganizing. She had started a reading circle on Friday afternoons that had drawn, surprisingly, not just the women in town, but 3 of the ranchers and the deputy sheriff, who claimed he came for professional research purposes and fooled no one. She had also, within 6 weeks, attracted the attentive interest of several men in Dunmore County, all of whom she had treated with the consistent warmth and consistent clarity of someone who understands that being kind and being interested are not the same thing. Eli knew none of this particular background. He knew her name because the postmaster had mentioned it, and her profession because the sign on the library door was legible, and approximately nothing else. He was not a man who kept up with the social particulars of Dunmore, which was a small town with a long memory and strong opinions and very little else to occupy it. She was coming out of the general store when he was going in, and she was carrying a box of books that had clearly been misjudged in terms of weight, and Eli, who had been raised in the belief that a man who walks past a woman struggling with a heavy load is not much of a man at all, stopped and said, "Let me help you with those." She looked at him over the top of the box. Direct assessing. "I've got them," she said. "But thank you." "You've got them. But you're listing to the left," he said. A pause. Then, to her credit, she laughed. Not politely. Actually, fair, she said, and let him take half the box's weight. They walked the half block to the library together. He held the door. She thanked him without the particular breathlessness that some women deployed around men who had done them minor favors, which he found refreshing. Eli Calloway, he said, setting the books on the desk. Anna Voss, she said. Do you read? The question surprised him enough that he answered it honestly rather than reflexively. Used to, more than I do now. She looked at him with the expression of someone filing information in the correct drawer. What did you read? History, mostly. Some natural science. Come back Thursday, she said. I have something that will interest you. He thought about pointing out that he had not agreed to come back Thursday, but he had the sense that this was a woman who made accurate predictions rather than suggestions, and so instead he said, I'll see what I can do, and left. He came back Thursday. The book she had set aside for him was a natural history of the American West that he had, in fact, been looking for since he'd read a reference to it in another volume 3 years prior. He stood at the library desk holding it with the expression of a man who has been handed something unexpected and is not entirely sure what to do about the feeling. How did you know? He asked. You said natural science and history, she said, and you're a Wyoming rancher. It wasn't a difficult calculation. He looked at her. She was straightening a shelf with the focused competence of someone who does everything with focused competence. He had the abrupt thought that Ruth would have liked her, which surprised him, and which he put away before it could become anything. What do I owe you? He asked. It's a library, she said. You owe me its return within 3 weeks in reasonable care. He returned it in 2 weeks, having read it cover to cover and made, for the first time in years, actual notes in a small journal he found in a kitchen drawer. He had questions. She had answers, or more precisely, she had better questions in return. He stayed an hour that second Thursday. Captain waited outside with the patient dignity of a dog who has lived with Eli long enough to understand that some things take the time they take. By the 4th week, people in Dunmore had noticed, towns like Dunmore do not require much to generate a thorough conversation. A man like Eli Calloway, who had not shown particular interest in any direction for 9 years, making 2, and then 3, and then 4 Thursday afternoon visits to the new librarian was, by the standards of Dunmore County, a significant event. Martha Greer, the postmaster's wife, thought it was the most hopeful thing she'd seen since the Abercrombies rebuilt their farmhouse after the fire. The Reverend Aldous Clark quietly made a note of a possible occasion. Hank Pruitt at the feed store watched Eli ride past one Thursday without stopping, which Eli always stopped, and shook his head with the slow, satisfied nod of a man whose theory has been confirmed. Eli, 12 miles out, and not given to attending to what Dunmore thought about his whereabouts, noticed none of this. What he did notice was that Thursday had begun to carry a different weight than the other days of the week. He noticed this the same way he would notice a fence post that had shifted slightly but hadn't fallen. Carefully, without immediately deciding what it meant. She came to the ranch for the first time in November. She had heard through the practical intelligence network that operates in every small western town that Eli kept an unusual collection of geological survey maps from the 1860s that she had been trying to locate for the library's small archive. She sent a note asking if he might consider donating them or allowing the library to make copies. He wrote back that she was welcome to come and look at them herself and judge their usefulness. She arrived on a Tuesday because Thursdays she had the reading circle. She arrived exactly when she said she would, which he noted, because punctuality was one of those qualities he found difficult to overlook in a person. Captain met her at the gate, evaluated her with professional thoroughness, and walked her to the front door, which Eli had always thought was the dog's best quality, and which he suspected was about to become inconvenient. She spread the maps on his kitchen table and studied them with the total absorption of someone for whom the outside world temporarily ceases to exist. She asked questions he had to think to answer. She knew what she was looking at, which he had not entirely expected. You know cartography, he said. My father was a surveyor, she said, without looking up. I grew up reading maps the way other children read storybooks. Captain put his chin on the edge of the table, watching her with the expression of a dog who has already made a decision. Your dog is staring at me, she said. He does that with people he approves of, Eli said. She did look up then. Something in her expression changed briefly and not quite into anything nameable. Then she went back to the maps. She stayed 3 hours. He made coffee. She drank it without mentioning that she noticed he had made enough for two, though she noticed. He was almost entirely certain she noticed. She came back 2 weeks later. She came back after that. By December, there was a pattern, and patterns in Eli's life had a way of becoming structural before he had fully examined whether he had chosen them. He stood one evening after she had left, looking at the 2 coffee cups on the kitchen table, and understood that somewhere in the past several weeks, something had changed in the house. Not dramatically, but the way a room changes when a window is opened after a long time closed. The air moves differently. Everything is somehow more like itself. Captain was watching him think. "Don't?" Eli said. Captain put his head on his paws. It was a cold evening in December, the kind that makes the mountains look close enough to touch and the world feel very specific and very real, that Eli finally said what he had been not saying for weeks. They were standing at the edge of the south field. She had come to return a map she had borrowed, and they had fallen into conversation, and the conversation had carried them outside the way conversations sometimes do, and now the last light was going orange on the ridgeline, and Captain sat between them like a small, warm parenthesis. "Anna," Eli said, "I want to say something." She turned to look at him. "I think you ought to know that I'm aware of what these visits have become." He was looking at the mountains. "And I think you're too young to spend them on a man who's 61 years old." There was a pause. "Did you practice that?" she asked. He blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "It sounded practiced," she said. "The way people say things they've been rehearsing in order to arrive at a conclusion they've already decided on." He turned to look at her. She was watching him with the expression she sometimes had at the reading circle when someone made an argument that missed the point by a significant distance. Not contemptuous, just specific. "You're 31, he said. "I know how old I am. I'm very clear on it. I'm 30 years older than you. Also clear on that." "Anna." "Eli," she said his name. "The way you put a book back on the correct shelf. Settled. Final. I grew up with a father who was 25 years older than my mother. I watched a man who knew who he was and what he believed build a life with a woman who knew what she valued. The number you keep bringing up is not the thing you think it is." He was quiet. "What I know," she said, "is that you listen. Actually listen. Not the kind where a person is building their next sentence while you're still finishing yours. You say what you mean without dressing it up to protect yourself. You put 2 cups of coffee out and never once mentioned it, and you built a survey table in the back room out of good pine. For no reason I can explain unless you were expecting me to come back." She paused. "Were you expecting me to come back?" He looked at the mountains. "I put in an extra shelf while I was at it," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, then she said so quietly it was nearly absorbed by the wind, "That's the whole answer." Captain stood up, shook himself, and walked back toward the house. "He always knows when something has been settled," Eli said. "And has it?" she asked. He turned to look at her full on for the first time in the conversation. This woman who had walked into his life through the side entrance of a library and a box of heavy books and a question about whether he read. He said, "Not yet, but it's getting there." He thought about it for weeks, which was his way, and she let him think, which told him something important about her. He thought about it while mending fences and checking water and riding the East Quarter in the blue-gray light of Wyoming, December. Captain participated in this thinking by walking beside him with an expression of studied patience, the canine equivalent of a man who already knows the answer and is giving you the time to catch up. He thought about Ruth. Not with guilt, with honesty, which is the respectful way to think about the dead. Ruth had been a practical woman who had told him, more than once, and with some emphasis, that regret was the most expensive thing a person could afford, and she had no intention of stocking it. He thought about what she would say if she could see him standing at the edge of the south field, talking himself out of something that was standing right in front of him. He thought he had a reasonably good idea what she'd say. He went to town on a Monday. Not his usual day. He got there before the library opened and stood outside in the cold with Captain at his heel, hat in hand, which he recognized was a picture that would fuel Dunmore's conversations for no less than 6 months. He didn't particularly care. Anna arrived at 8 o'clock, as she always did. She saw him on the steps. She saw Captain. She looked at the hat in his hand. Something moved in her expression, warm and careful and knowing. "You're here on a Monday," she said. "I couldn't wait until Thursday," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she unlocked the library door. "You'd better come inside then," she said. "You look cold and Captain looks smug." He did not ask her immediately. That was not his way either. He came inside. She made coffee from a small stove she kept in the back room, and they sat across from each other at the reading table with the Wyoming winter light coming through the tall windows, clean and honest and entirely without mercy for a man trying to pretend he didn't know why he was there. "I've been thinking," he said. "I know," she said. "I've been reconsidering the position I stated in December. The one about being too old? That one." She folded her hands on the table. And he reached into his coat pocket and set something on the table between them. A ring, plain gold, well worn. "This was Ruth's," he said. "I have worn it on my little finger since she died, because I didn't know what else to do with it. I took it off this morning." He looked at her steadily. "Because I think it belongs to what came before, and I think I'm being asked to decide whether I believe there's something that comes after." She looked at the ring. "Eli," she said, "ask me." "Anna Voss," he said. "I'm 61 years old and set in most of my ways, and I live 12 miles from town, and I have a dog who will be extremely opinionated about everything that happens in that house. I am, by any reasonable measure, not the obvious choice." "Ask me," she said again. "Will you marry me?" he said. The library was quiet. Outside, Captain could be heard in a disagreement with a passing wagon horse, which lasted briefly and concluded in Captain's favor. Anna looked at the ring. She looked at him. She said, "I came to Wyoming to find out what was actually mine, as opposed to what I had been handed and told to want. I have spent a year learning the difference, and I want to be very clear with you." She picked up the ring from the table. "I knew the answer to this question approximately 6 weeks after I arrived." "6 weeks," he said. "You held a door open and told me I was listing to the left," she said. "I found that very clarifying." He put the ring on her finger, not as an erasure of what had been, but as a passage forward from it, the way a river doesn't stop being the same river just because it has traveled past a different landscape. Ruth's ring on Anna's hand in a Wyoming library on a Monday morning in January. Something ending. Something beginning. Both real, neither canceling the other. They were married in March in the Dunmore Church, with nearly every soul in the county present, because nearly every soul in the county had, in one way or another, been waiting for this. Martha Greer wept from the third pew with unrestrained satisfaction. Reverend Clark delivered a ceremony that was, those who attended agreed, among the finest he had given, which may have had something to do with the fact that he found the whole situation genuinely moving. Anna wore the green of a Wyoming spring because she was not interested in following conventions that did not suit her, and because the green was remarkable against her red hair, and because Eli's face when he saw her walk toward him was, several witnesses later said, reason enough for the whole arrangement. Captain was present at the reception in the social hall by specific exemption, and was fed more cake than was wise by guests who agreed that he had earned it. The ranch changed, and changed entirely for the better. Not in its physical structure, in its quality. The silence that had accumulated in every room over 9 years of solitary living did not retreat dramatically. It simply became a different kind of quiet. The quiet of two people who are comfortable enough not to fill every moment with noise. A richer silence. A chosen one. She brought books which had been expected. What had not been expected was that she would also bring an opinion on the arrangement of the barn, a working knowledge of irrigation that turned out to be genuinely useful, and a specific approach to breakfast that Eli initially resisted, and within a year could not imagine living without. He built her a reading room off the east side of the house, proper shelves, measured to fit the books she already owned. A window placed to catch the afternoon light because he had observed, over several months, that she read better with afternoon light than morning light. He said nothing about this calculation. She ran her hand along the window frame when she saw it, and then turned around and looked at him with an expression that did not require any translation. "You notice the light?" she said. "It's a useful thing to notice," he said. She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "It is." Their daughter was born in the 2nd year. They named her Ruth, which was Anna's idea, and which told Eli something about her that he had already suspected but was glad to have confirmed. Ruth Calloway grew up with her mother's precision and her father's patience, and by the age of 5, a certainty about her own opinions that outpaced both of them combined, which they found alternately trying and extraordinary. Their son came in the 4th year. They named him James. He was a quieter child than Ruth, watchful in the way his father was watchful, absorbing the world before commenting on it. Captain approved of both of them without reservation, which Eli had always thought was the most reliable character assessment available. On a summer evening 10 years after that Monday morning in January, Eli sat on the porch of the ranch house he had worked for 40 years to make worth living in, and listened to his children arguing in the upper field with the absolute conviction of people who will not remember the subject of the argument by morning. The mountains were doing what they always did. The second captain, son of the first, slept across his feet with the self-satisfied weight of a dog who has made good life choices. Anna came out with cold water and sat beside him because she had over 10 years successfully concluded the coffee debate in the evenings in her favor. He allowed her this. He would not admit it was also his preference now. She sat beside him and looked at the mountains. He put his hand over hers on the armrest, and they stayed like that for a while, because some things do not require renegotiation. "You know what I think about sometimes?" he said. "The fence wire?" she said. "I went to town that October for fence wire and tobacco, and you forgot the tobacco." "I have never once," he said, "regretted forgetting the tobacco." She leaned her head against his shoulder. The mountains held the last of the light. The children's argument ended somewhere in the upper field, definitively, the way things end when one person has simply been more right than the other. The second captain sighed in his sleep. "Someone had to come looking for you," Anna said quietly. "In a box of books," he said. "Heavy box," she said. "You're welcome." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You knew, you said? 6 weeks in?" "Before that," she said. "But 6 weeks is when I was certain." "What made you certain?" She was quiet for a moment, looking at the mountains. "You told me I was listing to the left," she said. "And you were right. And you said it the way people say things they're saying to be useful, not to be noticed." A pause. "That told me everything I needed. Here's what Eli Calloway got wrong. He believed that 61 was a number that carried instructions, that it told him what was still possible and what had become theoretical. He had done his arithmetic on the years and arrived at a remainder that seemed, to him, to point clearly in one direction. Enough. He was mistaken. Not because age is meaningless, it is not. It is real and physical and demanding and honest, but because he had confused the count of his years with the weight of his value, as if they were the same calculation, as if the number of years a man has lived determines whether he has anything left worth giving. Anna Voss was not counting his years. She was counting the way he listened, the way he said true things without decoration, the way he held a door and carried a box and told an honest truth about fence posts and made 2 cups of coffee and built a reading room with the window facing afternoon because he had simply paid attention. She was counting every quiet, unremarkable act of a man who had spent 61 years learning how to actually show up for the people around him. Those things do not depreciate. They accumulate. Eli talked himself out of deserving something real because he had decided in advance that the arithmetic was against him. It took a woman with red hair and a box of geological maps and the particular patience of someone who knows what she is looking for to show him that he had been doing the wrong calculation entirely. He rode 12 miles into Dunmore on a Monday morning with his hat in his hands and knocked on a library door. And everything that came after was exactly what was always possible. It had simply been waiting for him to stop telling himself otherwise. The heart does not look at a birth year. It looks at a person, at who they actually are in the daily, particular, unrepeatable reality of their life. It looks at the shelf built from good wood, at the window facing the right light, at the hand that steadies a heavy box without requiring thanks. You do not age out of being that person. You do not age out of being found. Wherever you are tonight, whatever number you have been carrying around and using as a ceiling, I want you to hear this. Eli Calloway was wrong about what his years meant, and he was given the grace of someone who could see him more clearly than he could see himself. You may be in the same calculation, and you may be just as wrong. Dunmore, Wyoming is a long way from most of us, but the east field at sunset, the 2 cups of coffee, the window facing afternoon light, those are not so far at all. Until next time.